Hello, I'm Robert, a voluntary fact checker and helping you if you're scared of many things. And this is just continuing my series of short videos about Trump's submarine tweet. And I just found a series of quotes from Russian experts commenting from within Russia. And this is one of the example. So I think this is just chatter. This is chairman of Reserve Lieutenant General of the Russian Armed Forces. He's professor of the National Research University Higher School of Economics, kind of quite high up chap, probably knows a fair bit. And he says it's just more of Trump's chatter. This is his way of having fun. I doubt that he will actually send anything anywhere. And they have their combat patrol areas, usually Atlantic and Pacific Ocean. I don't think the Indian Ocean quite often, and they're usually on combat patrol. And he says they try not to go onto the ice, as far as I know. So this is, so to speak, our privilege and fun. That's what he says. They do go onto the ice, so I think it's more a matter of maybe the number of patrols onto the ice. The Russian submarines, they actually have their port is actually iced over in winter, so they have to go under ice to get out of the. I should mention that there. So it's actually in winter it's an iced over port. So they certainly do many more patrols out via ice under the ice than the Americans do. But the Americans do plenty of patrols under the ice, because actually the very first nuclear sub to reach the North Pole was from the United States. And then there was another nuclear sub later the same month, which was the first to surface. The first two nuclear subs, actually way back in 1958, were from the United States to reach the North Pole. And the Russians didn't get there until a few years later. And they do continue to do under the ice patrols, but certainly the Russians do them far more. They have to, because it's the only way to get out of their port in winter. And then there's another one. He says that the US has not 2 but 4 to 6 missile submarines on combat patrol at the same time. So he's saying, Trump's tweet is meaningless because they already have 4 to 6 of them. So sending 2 makes no sense. It's not adding anything. Same everyday reality of the last half century, which is exactly what I said. Ever since I was a young teenager, then this has been the reality. More than half a century. Back to the late 1960s. In 1969, as I said, there were 41 US nuclear submarines, far more than the 14 they have today. And there were over 200 eventually of the Russian nuclear subs. And of course, we never knew where they were, but it makes no sense that they would just spend their time sailing around North America. Of course they were all the time around the Russian coasts and just sort of nosing around and patrolling and trying to keep an eye on what the Russians are up to. That's their job. So he says, although theoretically additional boats could be quickly sent on patrols, I'm sure in practice that the US Navy is not changing its training and combat service plans because someone had a row on social media. And then there's another one, Dmitry Stefanovich, a research fellow, and he draws an interesting parallel with the 2 nuclear subs that Trump sent to the Korean Peninsula shortly before the thaw of relations with Kim Jong-un, and he wonders if this might be preparing the ground for a summit with Vladimir Putin at some point in the future. And I think there might be some potential to that, because Trump knows that Putin respects strength. So even though this is a totally pointless, totally meaningless statement he's making, he's presenting himself as being strong by responding to Medvedev. And just for Trump and Biden in the past, They've just not responded to Medvedev and let him say any wild thing he likes. And it's possible that Putin sees that as a kind of weakness. If that's true, then maybe Trump responding in this way will lead to Putin respecting him a bit more. I think there's some potential for that myself. So that's a new thought that I had as a result of reading these Russian comments on what's going on. That perhaps it's possible that Trump's tweet and choosing to engage with Medvedev may be a long game, a long strategy, in a way, in his to try and get Putin to respect him more, since he feels he's not respecting him. Because on the way so far, it's been Trump and Putin, and they have a phone call. And during the phone call, Putin, according to Trump's accounts, seems very agreeable. He talks constantly about peace. He says he wants peace. And then Trump goes home and talks to his wife, and he says, well, when you were talking to Putin, then Russia did its biggest ever drone attack on Ukrainian cities that they've done in the war to date, and several civilians died. How is that a man who's keen on peace? So that is just Putin playing games with Trump and just showing he doesn't respect Trump. So maybe Trump is thinking, well, perhaps if he respects me a bit more, then we'll make more progress. So that might be a possible explanation. And then I just want to go through my anecdote a little bit more, which I didn't do in my previous video. So when I was 6 years old, too young to know what was going on, that's when US and USSR built their first nuclear subs with nukes in ballistic missiles. And we've seen the 1958 one was when I was 4 years old. So that was when they visited the North Pole. Far too young for me. And then in 1960, that's when they built the ones with the nukes and ballistic missiles. And by then I was 6. I still was not interested and didn't know about these sorts of things. I was basically, I would have been reading my first books back then and very interested in maths and but no, this wouldn't have been my thing back then. And so then in the first 2 decades, the USSR built over 200 of them. If you go look at the nuclear history in Wikipedia. And so by the time I was a young teen, in 1969, by then I would have been aware of what was going on. Then the US had 41 of these nuclear subs patrolling somewhere in the world. Far more than today. I know they have different kinds of nuclear subs today. I'm not sure if that 41 is all, but they had more nuclear subs back then, and so did the Russians, and they were very commonplace, and they were constantly patrolling each other's shores. Because where else would they go? That's what it was all about. Especially back then, when they didn't have very good satellite photographs and stuff. So of course they were patrolling and keeping an eye on the Russians, and just being around. So I'm not sure what they would be doing. Maybe they surface from time to time. I'm not sure. Anyway, they and so that's over half a century ago, as they said, and this helps keep us safer, because before the first nuclear subs in the 1960s, the nukes on both sides were too imprecise. It wasn't possible for the United States to destroy the Russian nukes, or the Russians destroy the US nukes, because they were on ICBMs. And the ICBMs back then, they weren't precise enough. So you would have set 3, 4 or more ICBMs to try and destroy one ICBM on the other side, with most of them missing. So up to the first nukes in the 1960s, there was no possibility of a nuclear first strike, because they just didn't have enough nukes each, and they would have to build incredible and stupid numbers of nukes to have a chance of destroying the other side's nukes. And then after they got to the point where they had nuclear subs on both sides, then because they are undetectable, there was no possibility of a nuclear first strike. This means that it has never been possible for either side to destroy the other side's nukes in all of history. And this is seen as stabilizing because it means you can't win a nuclear war with a nuclear first strike. So this is seen as stabilizing, seen as a good thing that both sides have nuclear subs. Everyone agrees in strategy that this is good. And the UK is the only country with a nuclear capability that has only got nuclear subs. It used to have land-based cruise missiles, and it got rid of them. So, and the UK probably has a nuclear sub patrolling somewhere around Russia right now too. Where I think they have 2 typically at sea at any time, and it's highly likely that at least one of them is patrolling somewhere near Russia. It's just absolutely ordinary, absolutely normal. And I actually then did a bit more checking, and I found that the US there's a NATO anti-submarine warfare exercise going on right now, and I think I've got a link about that. Let's see. Yes, here we are. Yes, it's the next section. So this is an example. That's the Russia had its July storm exercise in the Arctic Sea, and that finished on July 27th. And just a day or two after that, NATO said, well, we'll do an exercise in the Arctic Sea as well. Remember that there's freedom of navigation anywhere through all the Arctic oceans. They can do exercises anywhere. They can do exercise just off Russia, just as Russia can do exercise just off the United States if it wants to. So of course the subs could be patrolling anywhere under the sea, but this was a surface patrol, a surface NATO patrol, a NATO group, and right now it is, but not because of Trump's tweet, before then, and continuing now, they are doing an exercise in the Arctic Sea, and they're testing anti-submarine warfare. And so, of course, they must have a nuclear sub somewhere nearby. It wouldn't make any sense. It would be far too exposed for a naval exercise simulation. They are practicing how they would doing exercise, how they would do military operations in the Arctic Sea. There's no way that a naval group would be patrolling in the Arctic Ocean without one of its nuclear subs nearby to just keep an eye on things. So we can be pretty sure that probably 1 or probably 2 right now in the Arctic Ocean. This is close to the Kola Peninsula, which is where the Russian naval base is and their submarine base is, the one that's covered in ice in winter. But in summer it's quite easy going, which is what it is right now. And at the same time, and this is nothing to be scared of, it's absolutely normal. This isn't even in the news. I had to hunt around to find this. So this is not a big news story. It just, if you hunt around, you look very carefully. I used Perplexity AI to help find the sources for this, because it was quite difficult to find. But I eventually found it. And just a very minor military item in the news, that there's a NATO task group that right now is in the Arctic Ocean. Here's a photograph of it. I'm testing refueling and transferring supplies between 2 ships in Arctic conditions. It's very cold. They were patrolling off Norway, and then they would have heard about it. They knew about the July storm exercise, which is now over, that Russia was doing in the Arctic. And so they continued around into the Barents Sea, and were there at the end of July and are still there. And there's a photograph of them practicing refueling and replenishment. And the Russian then, I know this may sound scary to you, but it is not. They did a live firing exercise near to the NATO patrol. So the way this works is they marked out an area of the sea. If you click through, you'll see the map that they said they did, that they would have given to. Let's just pick up that. Let's just show that to you. Now you can see. I think the map is there. So if you go, there's that group, sailing the Barents Sea. Let's pop down, look, there's the map. So they said, look, this is a live fire exercise area. This is a live fire exercise area. Don't go into it. So they set out this area, and this is absolutely normal. And I'm not quite sure, these are all different ships. somewhere amongst all those is the, and look at all the ships in different places, that's Norway. And they were in the Barents Sea. Like, I'm not sure where they were. So I'm not quite sure. I couldn't quite figure out where they are. Maybe it's not. Maybe they haven't shown. I think maybe those might well just be ships that have got their transponders on and that everyone knows where they are. The other ones you'd maybe spot in a satellite. You spot in satellite images. I don't think they gave the location of the actual ships here. The aircraft carriers, you can look up where all the US aircraft carriers are, but you can't look up where the smaller ships are. Even though they would probably be quite easily spotted in a satellite. Surely Russia knows where every single one is, but it's not public knowledge. So those were live fire exercise areas. This one's off Norway. This is off, and this is the Kola Peninsula, I think, is there. I think if I got it right. And so they probably were sailing somewhere around that, but they would have been warned not to go into that area, so they wouldn't be in there. They might be there or something. So that's how it works. And so this has been going on all my life. They know how to do all this sort of thing safely. This would never hit the news. And it just you've got to go to obscure. That's the Barents Observer, is where I think is where that came from. A very Barents, I think it's the Barents Observer, which is anything. Sorry, press the one button. Yeah, the Barents Observer, which is about anything that's going on in the Barents Sea. So techie journal following that. So this sort of thing has been going on all my life. They know how to do it safely. And so Trump's tweet is a bit like saying, I ordered 2 US bombers to be stationed in appropriate airfields in Guam. Or saying, I order the US radar facilities to make sure their radars are switched on. Something as stupid as that. Is that dumb, what Trump has said? I order our pilots to make sure that the wings are attached to their planes before they take off. I mean, it's that sort of level of inanity. It's a totally dumb, silly thing to say, for anyone who knows what they're talking about. I order our helicopter pilots to make sure they've got their rotors attached to the helicopters before they fly. I mean, I'm trying to think of something that's dumb enough to give you an idea of what it sounded like to me, the very first, as the moment I heard it, and why it's complete nothingburger, and that's why I say, why are people scared of this? It's just normal. Just like been like that all my life, as long as I remember, since I was a young teenager. So anyway, hopefully this helps you to be a bit less scared and to understand the perspective of military analysts. It's just, it's nothing. There's nothing here happening, nothing to even look at here.